When you have a voice to put yourself under a government, that is a form of democracy. That is the definition of democracy. What people who say Western-style democracy mean is any style of democracy.
Democracy could be defined broadly as the government by people's representatives, as opposed to the government by a single person and or by family inheritance. For a broad definition, that is, democracy is a government by people's representatives, then for me, more democracy is surely better than less.
When we say democracy, we're talking about prosperity, we're talking about stability, we're talking about social justice. We must recognize that democracy is there to bring us to these ends.
In my book, the person that I would follow in this is Aung San Suu Kyi in Burma or Myanmar, probably the worst dictatorship or one of the worst in the world. She says, what we want is value change. Even if there's government change, if these basic values have not changed, then one government can lead to another government, and so on and so on. And what she's saying is that the people at the bottom don't develop, because these vested interests stay at the top.
I support democracy in the West, where it functions well. I oppose it when it doesn't function well. And in certain countries, competitive elections lead to government's irresponsibility and accountability to minorities, impossibility of good governance, and loss of people's welfare.
If he is running my city, the mayor is good, my life changes. I don't care about the president, but the mayor or the district chief is important.
I think that before you go for this euphoric element of uprisings and democracy, you have to have in place the sort of institutions that you've got here in Hong Kong.
One of the things that I find really interesting about Humphrey's notion is that in the transition between dictatorship to democracy, in the violence of that transition, he blames the democracy and not the dictatorship.
I think there's a difference between what we need and what we want. I think we all want democracy. It's what the world needs now.
Case, and millions of Iraqis like him, were living under Saddam with a set of restrictions, and they knew that if they crossed the line, their families could be killed, they'd lose their job, they'd lose their house, and life was pretty dreadful. Then the Western democracies came in and stripped away the glue that held that dictatorship together, and the Al-Qaeda and the Mahdi army and the Sunni groups all came in, setting a new line of restrictions, more unpredictable, and if you cross that line, the same panoply of dreadful things would happen. Case turned to me, cracked a joke that had been doing the rounds. He said, "Remember, Humphrey, be nice to the Americans or they'll punish you with democracy."
Democracy itself, the word of the thing, is no paradise. The West has said free elections are only free in a free society. The election itself is no guarantee of anything if it takes place in an atmosphere of fear, of distrust, of repression.
The first problem is conceptual. That is, I didn't vote for the winner. Instead, I and many others voted against the winner. Why should the winner be called my representative? The second problem is a problem of justification. Why should majority? Does majority mean wisdom or correctness, or means obedience by minority? No. A majority support means neither wisdom nor correctness, and it does not guarantee minorities' obedience. So even most government officials are not selected by the majority principle. President Bush selects key officials within a small circle of family friends, for example, like the Secretary of the State. Well, election could also produce dictators, like Hitler.
It seems pretty obvious that in very sophisticated, advanced societies and nations like the United States, that democracy has systematically failed to procure important public collective goods, such as the environment and fiscal responsibility.
But isn't it interesting that the colonialists, the British colonialists, took the same view as the Chinese government takes? The Chinese were not fit to be consulted in a democratic way because they'd only get it wrong and be all chaotic and launch wars against each other and kill each other because actually you're not up to it. We, British, we were up to it, and guess what? The Chinese government says exactly the same thing as the British says to its own people. You're not up to it. You're not up to the business of deciding for yourself.
We need to avoid confusing democracy and liberty.
Have you ever heard of a democracy that systematically sets out to murder its people in their hundreds of thousands? Have you ever heard of one?
I think we need to think about the result, and also as to the meritocracy. And people say how you could get that, but well, actually it's a common thing among our life. How did you select engineers? How did you select your doctors? How did you select your judges? How did you select your military officers? And so on and so forth. We can surely see there are lots of quality people are leading in our society.
Who will select these people? So if we depend on meritocracy, we're stuck with a solution where the people who select the elect are not themselves then selected by the mass that they are supposed to govern.
The government pushed and made laws for this rural grassroots election, and over 95% of the villages have free election. Not only free, but also there is the law says you cannot propose no one can propose a candidate's party. The party cannot propose candidates. So you need to have 2 rounds of elections. First is to get the candidates, and second to get the winner. But after 15 years of the test, and the rural China is now pretty much dominated by crime syndicates.
You are going to vote. You're going to vote in this debate. But actually, of course, you shouldn't be voting. What we should have is we should convene a panel of democracy experts to vote for you. Because I tell you what, looking round you, I'm not at all sure that you're competent at voting. I think you should let me do it. Those things are true. But let's look for a moment at what lack of democracy universally means. It always means. It always means an absence of human rights.
In certain competitive elections lead to government's irresponsibility and accountability to minorities, impossibility of good governance, and loss of people's welfare.
Because they want their leaders to provide them with a better standard of living. They want their leaders to look at the rising prices. At times of economic pressure, when prices are spiraling, you want to know that the guys who are leading will be punished for not being able to manage the economy properly, for making you suffer.
He said one of the conditions of a democracy is that you're continually in the business of discussing whether or not you're sufficiently democratic and sufficiently accountable. That's what happens when you consult people. Frankly, in a place where you can get imprisoned if you speak out against the government, it's very difficult to monitor things. You don't have the capacity to know for sure what's going on, or even roughly.
Definitely, and that's what we're coming to, isn't it? When we're sick and tired of those who lead us, we want to know that they can be changed.